Excellent. Thank you.
Greg. Well, first of all, I'm delighted our speakers arrived today. I did see Senator Westerfield at the ham breakfast at the fair this morning, but Representative Tilley, if you noticed, just walked in the door. He had a flat tire, and so he's been hustling it from Hopkinsville and made it just in time. But I want to tell you that what a privilege it is for me today to introduce these two folks. I've had the opportunity to introduce other speakers, but these two are very special to me. I worked with them in the trenches this year on the heroin legislation, and I have labeled them my heroes. Without them, Kentucky would not have landmark heroin legislation. They were the architects of a bipartisan plan that created a comprehensive heroin law that's now become a national model. Other states and national conferences are looking at our legislation. With them, it's not about ego, self-interest, or self-promotion. It's about what's best for the Commonwealth. They're both from Hopkinsville, as Dick mentioned, and they're often referred to as the Hoptown Power Duo. What makes them interesting, and Dick referred to this, is their similarities and yet their differences. Both are lawyers. Both chair judiciary committees. Senator Whitney Westerfield, the Senate, John, the House. But to put this in perspective, you have to realize there are only 138 legislators in Kentucky. And these two very important committees are chaired by individuals from Hopkinsville, a town of 40,000. So both of them are chairs, which makes it a lot of fun for those of us who get to work with them on a regular basis. Both are dedicated public servants, and in addition to their current roles in the legislature, Whitney is the Republican candidate for Attorney General. John seriously considered becoming a member of a Democratic gubernatorial ticket and probably will in the future. Their differences are mostly philosophical. Whitney is a Republican. John is a Democrat. But they often drive to Frankfurt together, and they share ideology, and they challenge each other to see things from different viewpoints. They fight like cats and dogs sometimes. We go back and forth. Tally, who works with me, we go back and forth from Whitney to John. Who's saying what today? Who's not happy? What can we do to help? How can we help you all accomplish goal? But they always find a way to reach consensus, and more importantly, they learn to respect each other's right to have a different opinion and then to work together to find consensus. They work to make Kentucky a better place to live, work, and call home. And perhaps most importantly, something they share is that they are really nice people, and they truly believe in service above self. It is my honor today to introduce Senator Whitney Westerfield and Representative John Tilley.
He set me up something to trip on there. Thank you for praying for me, Dick Clay. I appreciate that. Without it, I may not have arrived safely. I got to tell you, when I was pulled over, it actually wasn't a flat tire, but it was low enough to cause me to stop. And the computer told me I had a low tire and I should stop, so I did. And a trooper came up to help me, as they normally do, and he asked me if he could change it. I said, no, I think it's just low. If I can, I was just right outside E-Town. If I can get up here, I think I can get it taken care of. He goes, well, I got to tell you what happened to me last night. He goes, I pulled over a guy doing 110 miles an hour on this very stretch, and he was heading to Louisville to the state fair. And he said, listen, if you're going 26 miles or over, it's an arrestable offense, and I'm going to have to take you in. And the guy said, if you do that, I'm going to lose my job. I'm sort of at my wit's end. I said, I've had a lot of trouble. I said, I can't lose this job. He said, Trooper said, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a juggler, and I've got to get to the state fair to perform. Trooper said, I've heard it all. A lot of excuses. Never heard that one. So he said, okay, well, I'll go with it. He said, well, can you juggle something for me? Do you have your stuff? The guy said, no, it's already ahead of me. They bring it in the truck. I don't have it. He said, sure. So the trooper goes, I got an idea. So he went to the back of his cruiser, popped open the trunk, and got out 3 road flares. And he said, go to it. So sure enough, the guy was taking these 3 road flares, and just no trouble at all. I mean, it's really quite a show. The trooper said, well, let me make this a little more difficult. So he lights the road flares and gives him 2 more. So he gives him 5 lit road flares. And so pretty soon it's nighttime almost. So I mean, it's a fireworks display on the side of the road, and it's just, it's drawing a lot of attention. Passersby are staring, and about the time it gets good, one car comes up and lays sideways into it and almost hits the cruiser. And the trooper said, I'm obviously inviting a lot of trouble here. So he said, what's this guy going to do? So the guy stumbles out of the car, sort of unsteadily and standing on his feet, and clearly had been under the influence of something or was. The trooper said, I'm just going to play with it for a minute. So the guy watches the juggler. He never stops, by the way, the juggler. I mean, he just kept on. He's scared to stop. So the guy looks at it and just abruptly, after a minute or two, walks straight to the back of the cruiser, gets in, puts the belt on behind the glass, and he's in the back of the cruiser. The trooper says, I've seen it all. I walk over to the car and say, why did you do that? And the guy says, well, you may have noticed I've had a few. He said, and I thought I better stop. I felt an obligation to stop. He says, but then when I saw that, I knew I couldn't pass that sobriety test, so I better turn myself in. So that made me even later getting here. So, Whitney, who's on first, man? Who's going out? We never know who starts these things.
Westerfield and I approved that joke.
Get in here. Get in here. We put together a little slide presentation. We have split mics. All right. Thank you. But we did not. That actually adds to the rapport we can have. It's all a show anyway, right?
It is.
Yes.
It is.
We actually can't stand one another. That's not true. Honestly, the chairman did put together. What's that?
At least we're on the right mics.
We're on the right mics. That's right. Listen, I need to be in the middle. That's where
right.
That's
right.
Chairman, you started with, he emailed me last night at about midnight with a slideshow that he put together himself. This guy he's a multi-talented guy. He used to work for Apple in some kind of like contractor's position, and he's quite the techie, I call it. I don't even know what you'd call it, so I just call it a techie.
I've never worked for Apple.
Well, you did. You were some kind of global developer.
I was an app developer. I had an app developer account for.
You worked for Apple, as
like
far
a
as
couple
I'm
of years.
concerned.
Oh man. You can just tune out that side of the stage for the rest of the presentation.
No, it'll get.
Don't have expectations set too high. It was late last night when I threw something together. I wanted you all to have something to see in addition to hearing us ramble on about a bill that we both worked pretty hard to get through. First, I want to say thanks. I appreciate you all giving us a chance to be here and to talk about it. For 3 years, the General Assembly's been struggling to get something through, and for different reasons, it has always failed. The bill for 2013 and 2014 started in the Senate, and despite the best efforts of my colleague here, did not survive the House. I know how hard he worked at the 11th hour trying to salvage a heroin bill before we managed to pass one in 2015, and we just could not get it accomplished. And so in 2015, there seemed to be renewed pressure. You all are dealing with it very heavily here in Louisville, and certainly as you go further north, it's a bigger deal still, where, as you know, parts of Kentucky are suffering multiple dozens of overdose deaths a month just from heroin. And it's hard for people back home in Hoptown to understand proper perspective on how big a problem that is. And when you go to a group and I'm in the other club, I'm a Kiwanis. By the way, I have never seen a Rotary or Kiwanis meeting with this level of production value in my life. This is serious.
Whitney, we're in the big city now.
We are.
Yeah.
We are.
I'm a Rotarian, by the way. Come down and visit our auction. Thank you. I appreciate it. You're not going to get that round of applause, you Kiwanian. That's not going to work.
I got nothing. All right. Anyway, when we tell people about what other parts of the state are experiencing, it's hard for them to understand until we say, imagine if John or I came back to Hoptown and we started telling everybody that one drug, one thing was causing at least 24 overdose deaths a month just in Christian County, or just in Trigg County, or just in Todd or Logan. And that's when people stop for a second and realize just how grave an issue it is. So the pressure was on everyone in all parts of state government to get something done. And so we set out to do that. We worked on, excuse me, we worked on a bill that had a couple of different provisions in it. And we're going to talk about each one of those in brief today and hopefully have some time for some questions at the end. Everyone generally agreed on some of the broad ideas that we needed to have in this bill. And if I ever say anything that you need to add to or correct, just stop me and say I got that wrong. there was a
Don't
general
worry, I will.
no question, I believe it. There was a general consensus that we wanted to increase penalties for traffickers, people who are genuinely just pushing this, not the low-level dealers that are funding a habit, but the people that are genuinely just in it to deal and deal in death. We also wanted to increase access to treatment, and we actually accomplished a great deal of that in the bill, and I'm very thankful for that. One particular piece of language that we'll talk about in the treatment section of this presentation, John and I have been working on. I've been trying to get language through for a couple of years, and I get it out of my chamber, and it gets down to his, and we can't get it through on its own or attached to something else, and we managed to do both in 2015. I'm pretty proud of that particular part. The needle exchange program, which obviously you all here in Louisville are familiar with, that was a controversial provision. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally the funding piece of the bill, which came in at the 11th hour, but was very important, and hopefully will be renewed come 2016, because those efforts are very critical, and you'll get an overview of where that money's going. And I honestly can't remember which one's first. Penalties. So to give some quick perspective on the penalty section, and I've just given some highlights there, and you can read that on your own. We wanted to make sure we were capturing the people that are actually dealing, as I said, not the ones that are selling it to support a habit, but the people that are genuinely dealing in it. And with a change that came a few years ago, there was a quantity element of trafficking that came in. 2 grams for heroin specifically. If you were over 2 grams, it was a higher penalty. It was under 2 grams, it was a lower penalty. And there was a sense that, and we had prosecutors telling us that, and this is the truth, once that quantity was set at 2 grams, you had a lot of dealers who were genuinely just dealing go right underneath. So if and it didn't matter where the quantity was set. If we'd set it at 5 grams, they'd deal in 4.8. Except it's at 2, so they were dealing at 1.8 or 1.9.
And let me jump in to make a point. We're both former prosecutors. I've done some defense work. He prosecuted more recently than I have. I was more of a county attorney level prosecutor. He was a felony prosecutor. Handled felonies for those of you who work in the court system at the preliminary hearing level as they come in the door. I also had other part of my practice. So I maybe had a little different perspective, but in working on drug policy through the years, and this is my 9th year in the Assembly, and I've chaired the committee since '09, I've come to learn a couple of things that are hard for people to really grasp. No matter what we do to traffickers, the market replaces that trafficker immediately.
Yeah.
And that's why for the last, since 1971, we've learned some real painful lessons about what's been labeled the drug war. So I think, the senator and I actually worked very hard to try to be surgical in our approach and really capture those people, as he said, that are trafficking commercially, and to try to get those folks that aren't into treatment, those peddlers who may be addicted and selling to support a habit. Heroin's a little bit different. Is Representative Butler here anywhere, Denny? I know he's supposed to be here. He was going to be here. Then
Okay.
Joni Jenkins was clearly in Louisville, as Wes Jenkins, her nephew, was, if you remember, a member of the Little League World Series team from Louisville here, and he died of an overdose. And there's a benefit just next month that I'm coming back for. And we're talking about these are your neighbors and your neighbors' sons and daughters, and maybe your sons or daughters. And sometimes they're selling to support a habit. Sometimes they're selling because they're caught in the game. Sometimes people are being trafficked to sell under the threat of death or enslavement. So that's the complicated part about it. If it was just as easy for us to respond legislatively with some cachet of high penalties, we wouldn't have this problem today, because that's been done since 1971. I'm proud we were able to work together in this regard. But I just wanted to make the point that we can't just wave a magic wand. We're going to have to continue to focus on the demand for heroin or any other opiate or any other drug for that matter. Synthetics is making a bit of a comeback. But the penalties, and again, I don't want to derail we've got a lot to talk about. I want to spend time on some of the areas that are important to me. The penalties were important to me as well, because I think we needed to get it right. But I want to set the stage for further drug policy, which we've done, to always keep that in mind, that we're going to have to continue working on that in the market, the market forces and that demand side. The supply is going to be there. If the demand's there, the supply will always meet the demand.
In a nutshell, the penalties, two things I want to point out. We didn't change the class of felony that you could find because of the quantity, but we did change the parole eligibility. Parole eligibility is how much time you've got to serve on your sentence, the percentage of your sentence you must serve until you are eligible to meet the parole board and be paroled. We raised that for cases where commercial trafficking indications were present. So if you were found with under 2 grams or over 2 grams, if you were found with just that and that's it, not much indication of a commercial operation there, parole eligibility would still be low. However, by contrast, if they were to find you with a quantity of heroin, but they also found scales, a lot of cash, found a couple of cell phones, found baggies, you name it, other paraphernalia that indicates there's something more substantial or commercial about your operation, then the prosecution can ask for, or the court can order or compel that higher parole eligibility. And then finally, that's the first thing. Second thing is the new offense. We actually created a new crime, importation. So if you bring heroin into the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that's a standalone Class C felony with a 50% parole eligibility. The parole eligibility before they went to 50 was 20, 15 or 20, depending on the offense, which is not a lot of time. And truth be told, we moved it to 50. On average, they were serving about 40, if I remember correctly. John, is that 38, 40%?
Well, yeah, some were as high as close to 45, but there
Okay.
were some in the right under 40. You're right. They were different.
But we created this importation defense, which I'll point out a little anecdotal story, was put to use less than 48 hours after the bill was signed. The bill went live the moment the governor's pen went across the sheet of paper on the hours after the General Assembly adjourned sine die. With emergency provision, it went live, and within 48 hours, police in Covington had stopped 2 guys coming into northern Kentucky. So quick were they to make an arrest on importation, they called the prosecutor looking for the statute number and hadn't been assigned yet.
Right.
But it got 2 guys off the street, and they're now facing indictment. They're under indictment in northern Kentucky, facing their trials.
We're one of 5 states to have that. There's probably some question. We think it passes constitutional muster. It'll probably be challenged, but we'll have to just see how that works. I will say that we placed that in the bill because of the pressure. Northern Kentucky really is one of the epicenters in the country, and in Louisville's obviously feeling the effects here as well. But we're hearing that these folks were coming across the border. I do want to clear up a myth. There was some suggestion that the reason Northern Kentucky had become the epicenter was because of the more lax penalties for traffickers in Kentucky, and that was actually not the case. The penalties for traffickers on par are really more, were already more stringent here in Kentucky than Ohio. But we want ours to be within the range, and we're certainly, I think, above most of our bordering states as well. So I don't want that to be an issue going forward. But we did want to make these tweaks in it, and we think they're good tweaks. We're in treatment now. Chairman, you want me to kick off?
Fire away.
Well, I don't know that I can ever stick to a script. I don't have one. I brought my iPad because I wanted to remember a number or two.
There's no script.
No script here. Treatment. We're running out of time. We got about 10 minutes. We want to leave some room for questioning. By and large, we wanted to remove any barriers to treatment with our managed care organizations. Obviously, there were a number of barriers to treatment. We thought we sped up the credentialing process, although we want to make certain that folks are properly licensed to avoid the fly-by-night folks that come in to take advantage of expanded Medicaid to treat. We want to make sure MCOs cover all the treatment that is necessary under the new, wherever you are on the politics of this expanded Medicaid debate of the ACA, one thing is for certain, it does make more funds available to treat substance abuse, and I think that's a good thing. To me, it's a medical condition, and we have to treat it that way. It's a public health issue, by and large, and we want to look at this bill as really more public health than criminal justice, even though it came through our committee, and we engaged for the first time the committee. Tom Birch chairs the Health and Welfare Committee, or in Frankfurt it's called Hell and Warfare sometimes. But you can laugh nervously if you want to. I'm the one that'll take grief for that. Having said that, we engaged that committee and came up with, we just told them, listen, we need every possible solution. We don't need to leave anything on the table. And I got a call at 2 a.m. after the bill passed from the Huffington Post. Many of you read that. And I interviewed there, as many Kentuckians did, on this issue. and he said he'd been scouring, this particular reporter had been scouring states looking for answers in the drug policy battlefield, and he said he'd never seen the creativity that he'd seen in our bills. I thought that was a compliment, and some of the provisions, I gave you one example because it's one of your own here. Again, I'll reference Joni Jenkins. She's been on the front line, and she said when someone comes into the ER, and this was also prompted by our colleagues on the right from the Republican Senate that said, how do we hook, and we said the same thing though, how do we hook these folks into treatment? For instance, let's say a Good Samaritan situation comes up. You don't want to charge somebody who's just overdosed. There's a chilling effect, nobody wants to call. If there's someone lying dead, dying from an overdose, they don't want to get in trouble, possession or trafficking, so they often could dump the body, as you know, maybe not call at all, the person dies. So we want to put in a Good Samaritan provision, which 22 other states have, to allow that call and to give that person immunity. Well, then how do we hook that person into treatment, though? How do we do that? Well, we have a couple creative solutions. They're not mandated. The treatment is not mandated, but we think we can use, for those of you that work in the mental health field, maybe the 202A process or Casey's Law to begin really hooking folks into treatment, sometimes against their will involuntarily. And I think it's that important, though, as if they were to have, for instance, a mental health condition, a mental illness, which required them to be hospitalized for a period of time to stabilize their condition. And so we need to be creatively thinking outside the criminal justice box to get these folks. I don't think a prison cell is where an addict needs to be when they're battling, again, an addiction. So the treatment side, as you see, I just wanted to preface sort of our philosophy moving forward. Well, there's so many, I think, good ideas in the bill that were brought to us by so many people, and we looked at every state. Our staff was really tireless in that regard. We've only got a few minutes. You want to move past it?
One of the things that we included in the treatment, this is the language I was talking about. In Kentucky, there are normally 3 facilities that treat pregnant mothers expecting a child on the way that are suffering with substance abuse. Independent from the heroin bill, I and Chairman Tilley have both been trying to work on various legislative angles to address the occurrences of NAS, neonatal abstinence syndrome. This is where a child is born drug dependent because of the drug use of the mother. And these are children, and if you haven't seen this footage, go to YouTube if you think you can manage that and watch it. These are children that have to be weaned off of whatever their mother was using with morphine lollipops, and they spend the first good little bit of their lives in the NICU. There's also but a relatively large dearth of studies and research available for long-term damage to these children, developmentally, behaviorally, emotionally, whatever. We don't have the answers for what happens to a child whose mother was using heroin or cocaine 15 years, 20 years after they're born. Frustratingly enough, in 2013, this is a bit of just a side issue. In 2013, a bill went through, one of these monsters that everything just gets splotched into, had language in there that I didn't know was there. And to date, no one's been able to explain for me why it was in there. It actually prohibited the Department of Health, I believe that was the department, from divulging or sharing even anonymized data on the diagnoses of NAS. Even as a legislator, I couldn't ask for it and couldn't get it. Couldn't tell you or my constituents about it. So in 2014, I passed a bill that undid that. And we now see what's going on.
Whitney, let me point one thing out. I know we're at it, but Volunteers of America right here in Louisville, we heard a presentation from them. I've had a friend who was on the board, brought him into one of our committees last year. And it just, sometimes in government, we're just penny wise and a pound foolish. We could spend $25,000 to $27,000 on the front end to treat a drug-dependent mother who's pregnant, get her into a residential facility, and the success rates are off the charts. These ladies know, again, gave us numbers that really will frighten you about the future going forward, but we're starting to, I think, address it in a better way. We can spend, roughly that amount, and we're having great success at delivering oftentimes relatively healthy children, non-drug dependent children, and the mothers are getting the treatment they need, and then getting on a different path for that amount.
While he's talking about here are the costs.
Here's the cost.
2012 to the Commonwealth, almost all of these are Medicaid costs.
I mean, it's $250,000, Mary Michael. I mean, just one number to throw out there, just to deal with that with that NICU, just for that critical care for that period. We're not dealing with developmental delays down the road. The studies are all over the map on that. These kids, thankfully, if they get proper treatment, they're starting to level off, we think. There are some studies that indicate there are some developmental concerns, but that's just one example of things we can do in government to make things a little better and actually infuse some prevention on the front end and some investment that yields a good return.
The bill actually mandates that pregnant mothers be given priority access to substance abuse facilities across Kentucky.
There are waiting lists all over.
Yeah, those three, and John and I have had an opportunity to tour a couple of these and see them and see the work that they're doing, and it's fantastic, and it takes a lot of passion and hard work from their staff, and they all have a waiting list. They're all maxed out. So the bill, both Senate Bill 192 and Senate Bill 54, if I'm not mistaken, both from this year, obviously, have that language that gives those mothers priority access.
I think we're out of time.
Well, what I was going to say is we're going to open the mics to the audience if you guys want to stay up there, and we'll take questions. It is about 1 o'clock for those that have to leave, but we'll leave the mics open and questions to these two gentlemen.
I didn't get a chance to touch on the needle exchange. I know it's important. We're going to visit the needle exchange today, and we're going to visit the Louisville jail with Mark Bolton. I saw his face somewhere out there a minute ago, and visit the detox facility, the largest in Kentucky.
Henry?
Thank you for your boldness. I wonder, two questions. One is, have you ever been threatened for your work?
Yes.
And be interested to know where that came from. And also, you talked about parole, but what are the basic penalties for a trafficker that is caught fully?
It depends on the quantity that they're trafficking in, and it depends on the substance. The quantity is 2 grams for heroin, 4 grams, I think, for cocaine and meth. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head.
Okay, so what happens to these people that are bad?
If they're found guilty, if they enter a guilty plea, they serve some portion of their sentence, and then they are paroled. Whether or not they participate in substance abuse programs it's not mandated.
Class C, typically a Class C felony, which is you got ABC, and it's 5 to 10 years. They're going to serve at least half their prison sentence and maybe more, depending on the parole board's wishes.
Yep.
Final section of my question would be,
First time offense, by the way.
what are the demographics of these major traffickers? Age, background, do we know anything about that?
Crime is a young man's game, 18 to 30. You don't find many outside that realm. Again, we're finding when you pick up a trafficker on the street, you're usually not picking up any kind of kingpin.
Right.
You're picking up young men on the street who usually carry a weapon. As Representative Butler, who just walked in, will tell you, if these guys aren't carrying a weapon, they're dead. This is a really a zero-sum game.
Back McClure, question, is there any direct prosecution of a seller that results in the death of an individual customer?
You mean, is there a provision for a homicide or prosecution for that? Federal law provides for that. We discussed that. It derailed the bill. There is a possibility under Kentucky law that you could make the case. It's very difficult.
It is an incredibly difficult needle to thread, but it could be done.
Much more easy at the federal level, so those cases can be taken by the U.S. Attorney.
That was actually one of the sticking points with a prior version of the bill last year and the year before that created some trouble.
Can you tell us something about the demographics of heroin and opioid abuse, particularly in Jefferson County, where people think that it's a lower income problem and may not be aware that it affects everybody, probably everybody's extended family in this room will have somebody who's got a heroin problem, an addiction, or they've been handed out oxycodone or oxycontin by some, pill prescribing doctor. And who's it all affecting? And can you enlighten us less about the traffickers and more about the users?
I'll give you a perfect for instance. Earlier this year, we had testimony, and John, I can't remember if it was an interim meeting or if it was one of our Judiciary Committee meetings, but it was about the heroin issue and the legislation, so I guess it was during session. There was a young man who I think was from Lexington. He's in his early 20s right now, if memory serves. Very bright, very articulate, came from a home, not a broken home, not a poor home. It was an upper middle class. He went to whatever high school he went to in Lexington, had, I think, scholarship resources to go to Center College, was an athlete. Had everything a young child would need growing up. Everything. And then he dropped a bomb on us in the committee. He said, and a year ago this month, or a year ago roughly, he was found half naked, almost dead under a bridge in Ohio by law enforcement up there. And it started with marijuana use in high school, and that escalated because it wasn't enough, and the substances kept getting worse and stronger, and eventually got onto heroin. And this bright kid who no one would associate with that. Most people, you all, I, John, if you're not around this on a regular basis, you think it's other people, or you think it's the poor or the poverty-stricken, and there are plenty of poor and poverty-stricken people it does impact. But it knows no social class.
Let me add briefly.
Addiction knows no social class.
The statement's been made that I was chair of the Commerce Committee with Robert Stivers, the Senate President, on the pill mill bill, which is really just more than pill mills. We've eradicated pill mills, thankfully. We've had great numbers that are coming in now on our prescribing practices, the number who are suffering directly from prescription abuse. But I want to say this, those heroin overdose deaths began to tick up even prior to the passage of our first prescription drug bill. And so we are addicted to opiates in this country. It's not just Kentucky. We're addicted to opiates. One thing that'll blow your mind, I could go through 20 minutes of numbers. Yep. This country consumes over 95% of all the opiates, all the prescription painkillers in the world. That ought to answer your question. Heroin's an opiate. I see Representative Butler shaking his head. We have got to move away from opiate painkillers. So they've got to be used only when they're absolutely needed. We're starting to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
Needle exchange, you want to?
Real quick, the bill allows local governments to set one up if they want. We didn't actually set up any rules or steps specifically stating what a needle exchange program should look like, because the needs of Kenton County and Jefferson County and Fayette County are different from Christian County. The resources are different, the needs are different. So we simply made a change to the drug paraphernalia statute that allows a local government, if they want to create a needle exchange program to meet the needs of their community, and it has to be approved at that local legislative level, which is obviously what Jefferson County has done. I think Lexington's pretty close. I'm not sure if I haven't heard of any other places in Kentucky, but that's so that each place can set up their own based on the needs that they have. And as John said, we're going to take a tour with Representative Butler here in just a little bit to take a look. I actually haven't been there yet. The biggest concern there, the controversial part obviously, is that there's an argument that you're enabling drug use. The flip side of that is a couple-fold. One, where we've seen needle exchange programs, we see the occurrences of Hep C and other bloodborne pathogens drop. We've seen needle sticks of law enforcement and normal citizens drop. So there's plenty of data out there that shows that they actually do a good job. And two, whether this exchange existed or not, these people are going to use. Whether it's a clean needle or a dirty one, they're going to use no matter what. So
yeah, I got to jump in with my numbers because, again, between 2000 and 2012, this state saw a near 1,600%, and I didn't misspeak, near 1,600% increase in opioid-dependent cases that were attributable to heroin abuse. I mean, hepatitis C and opioid dependence, dual diagnosis. Make sense? We have 7 times the national rate of Hep C in Kentucky right now. 7 times the national rate. It costs about $100,000 of Medicaid tax dollars to treat someone, and the good news is there's an awfully good drug out there that's yielding great results. Almost, we're thinking a cure at this point, but it's a $100,000 cure. Kentucky spent about $37 million 2 years ago just treating Hep C in Medicaid. I will tell you that the rates of HIV are also spiking. You know full well what happened across the river here when their health department director in a sleepy little rural area in Indiana said, our HIV rates have now surpassed that of sub-Saharan Africa, all due to needle sharing. Now, needle sharing, it's in 30-plus states around it. There's 234 programs, 235 now with Louisville, I think, across the country. They work unequivocally. The research is off the charts. They just get it done. This one, I'm hearing great things from this one already. I'm proud that we were able to get it done. I'm proud that Whitney listened. That's what he does best. He listens. If folks would, I think we both do. You know, again, I think we need folks to come in and educate us like some of the experts in the room, like these ladies here. And that's why the needle exchange happened. When I started talking about it last year, some of my colleagues looked at me like I had 3 or 4 heads. But we soon began to talk about the successes of it, again, reaching out for any solution to this problem. I could go on and on about that program, but I believe in it.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And I'm sure you'll be here after the meeting to talk to individuals. Thank you so much. They'll be here after this meeting in case you want to talk with them some more. Don't forget, in the back will be Charlie playing the piano for us all, and I hope you all have a great weekend. This meeting is now adjourned.